So, one of many facets of science fiction is, of course, time travel. And, of course, this appears in Star Trek quite frequently, actually. Most of the time for the best, and sometimes, well, in recent years, not so much. Well, anyway, so the first time they actually traveled back in time was in an episode called Tomorrow is Yesterday. Oh, yeah. The possibility had been discovered in an earlier episode. I believe that was Naked Time, where they had to violate the laws of physics in order to save the ship. And for a brief moment, they went back in time a couple of days. And then they said, wow, look at that. That means time travel is possible. You see, they didn't know it was possible. It was still just in the theoretical at that point. That's when time travel in the world of Star Trek was discovered. Not when the Red Angel showed up, not when Harry Mudd had a time machine on his wrist that Star Trek Dysentery forgot all about for their second season. Yeah, can't even maintain their own continuity. But anyway, yeah, that's when time travel was discovered. And then another little accident happens at the beginning of this episode, in which the Enterprise encounters the gravity well of a black star, they refer to it. I'm assuming this is the same thing as a black hole, which is often described as having been a star that collapsed in on itself. So, in an attempt to escape the gravity well, they really forced the Enterprise with all its power to escape it, and as a result, it got, not slingshot, but whiplashed across space, and this shoved them back in time, and so they arrive in orbit around Earth, and suddenly discover that it's 1966 Earth, or 67, somewhere thereabouts, so, oh no, we're back in time. Now what do we do? They got to find out a way to get around it. But at first, they get discovered by the Air Force, and they say, hey, we're seeing a UFO, and the pilot goes to investigate. And the pilot, they realize his jet could possibly be armed with nuclear weapons, and they realize it's a threat, so they put the ship in a tractor beam. The airplane is not fit for this sort of treatment, and so breaks up, and so they have to beam the pilot aboard the Enterprise, and well, here's where the trouble begins. So even though the Enterprise makes it into orbit, they've got this man from the past on their ship, seeing it, meeting with them, and knowing what the future entails. And so Spock says we can't return him. He's seen the future. He can't go back to Earth and tell them what he's seen and all that. Well, he's not too happy about this, but, well, what are you going to do? Meanwhile, Spock has to come up with the calculations to figure out how they can reverse what's happened and head back, actually forward to the future, their home. And, of course, it's Spock, so, of course, he's got to figure it out. But in the meantime, the pilot is, well, again, none too happy about this. Hey, I got a wife and kids. Well, when he mentions that, Spock, of course, says, oh, wait, I hadn't thought of that. And so he looks up the kids and realizes that, yes, even though the pilot himself doesn't really do anything of significance, his son, on the other hand, does. Something about a probe sent to not Venus, Saturn in the future, and that this was all significant for the space program and going and all that sort of stuff. So, well, if he doesn't go back, then, because his son doesn't exist yet, he hasn't had a son yet. Apparently, he only has a daughter or daughters, and that's when he realized, oh, I'm gonna have a son. Oh. And they realize, oh, he's got to go back, and so they decide that they'll go to the base, which the pilot knows, and he gives them a little map of where to go. And they'll destroy the records and photographs and tapes of what happened, so that there's no record of the Enterprise being seen, and then they'll have to return the pilot back. Well, that's all well and good, and all kind of hijinks ensue, and a lot of this sets the standard for a lot of the time travel hijinks that Star Trek would go through. There's another one coming, and then, of course, Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, owes a lot to this episode in a lot of ways. There's some comical things happen at the same time. It's all very serious. and all that sort of stuff. And this episode is a bit more comical than not. I mean, Kirk gets captured, and at one point he's interrogated, and the Air Force commander or what have you gets tired of Kirk's flippant answers, because Kirk can't tell him the truth, and even if he does, the guy's not going to believe it. But then the guy says, I'm going to lock you up for 200 years. And Kirk says, well, that should be about right. And of course, yeah, that would be just about right. So that's the way it goes. Of course, Spock comes up with the solution of the slingshot maneuver, they call it, where they use the gravity well of the sun to run up against it and slingshot them back or through time. And of course, somehow this will get them to go forward instead. Hey, it's Spock's math. Don't ask me about it. So they do this, and then they realize, hey, they could send the pilot back. Now, this is where the story kind of falls apart in some ways. It's not really explained. The Enterprise crew remembers everything that's happened with their little time travel adventure, and they make it back to Starfleet in the future and all that. But the pilot there's a guard that they accidentally beam aboard too. It's a funny scene and all that. Well, both of them have to go back, and so they do this. When they reach the moment they left, which is kind of odd, they're going back in time, and then they go forward again. So they go back a day to return the pilot back to his plane at the moment that he was beamed aboard. And as they do this, he's beamed into it, and then he looks, he's tracking the Enterprise, and then it's just gone. Well, it wouldn't be gone. It would still be there. You would have two starships, one in orbit beaming the pilot down, the other one in the sky of Earth, in the stratosphere. And there's no explanation for this, why it just disappears. You know, they don't prevent their ship arriving there. What happened was the initial incident that put them back in time in the first place. So the ship would still be there. And the pilot is beamed into his ship, and it seems to suggest that he doesn't remember all of this because, well, it doesn't happen because he's back on his ship, but he had to be beamed there. So it doesn't really hold up. Meanwhile, the guard is beamed back to the planet, to the base, right before he discovered Kirk and Sulu when they were stealing the photographs and stuff. And he looks in the door, and they're not there now, so but they would be. So there's no real explanation for how this happens that way, because if they're not there, then there's nothing to do. So I don't know. It's a little too much like magic at the end there. But you know, through the process of it's an entertaining show. There's some fun aspects to it. And you know, and that's bolstered by the great cast that Star Trek had and all that. And but still, that's a little bit of a plot hole there about how that exactly works out. So, but other than that, again, every episode for one reason or another is pivotal to the foundation of Star Trek, and of course this one in which they deal with time travel, which we will see repeated again and again throughout the lore of Star Trek. All right, thank you for watching and listening. Say, why not like and subscribe, and check out that link description below. That'll take you to my many stores that have plenty of goodies for you, and you can watch my videos over at BitChute. Yes, the Mr. Nailsin channel over at bitchute.com, and check out the podcast, Mr. Nailsin Show, on RadioMisfits.com.